My name is Gemma, and I am 34 years old. As a senior security engineer at Tech Forward Solutions, I never imagined my career would peak with watching our new CTO, Victor, frantically fail to access our systems while the entire board looked on. This was not personal revenge. This was protecting everything we had built from a dangerous fraud. How does a security engineer take down a powerful CTO with just one question? The answer might surprise you. Before I dive into this wild ride, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more tech industry survival stories. 6 years at Tech Forward Solutions had taught me everything about our security infrastructure. As the head of cybersecurity, I led a team responsible for protecting our business-to-business software platform that handled sensitive enterprise data for over 300 clients. We were growing fast, hitting 200 employees last quarter, with a reputation for both innovation and reliability in the competitive tech landscape. My team consisted of 5 incredibly talented security specialists. Rachel, our cryptography expert with a PhD from Stanford, could crack open security flaws in systems that seemed impenetrable. David, our network security wizard, had previously worked for the Department of Defense and brought military-grade precision to everything he touched. Amir specialized in penetration testing, finding vulnerabilities before hackers could exploit them. Jasmine was our API security specialist, ensuring our interfaces remained locked down tight. Tony, the newest member, had a natural talent for spotting patterns in potential attacks before they materialized. We worked directly under Mark Stevens, our previous CTO, a brilliant man in his 50s who had been with the company since its founding days. Mark understood something crucial: that many executives miss security as not a department you can sideline. He treated us as essential partners in product development, not obstacles to innovation. Mark listened to my concerns, trusted my judgment, and gave me the authority to implement robust security measures even when they required extra development time. Security first, features second, Mark would always say. We can always add more bells and whistles, but we can never explain to clients why we lost their data. Our relationship was built on mutual respect. Mark mentored me through complex technical and leadership challenges, while I helped modernize our security approach. Under his guidance, Tech Forward developed one of the most secure data management platforms in the industry. We routinely turned down shortcuts that might have accelerated growth but would have compromised our security posture. Everything changed when Mark called an unexpected all-hands meeting last November. Standing before the company, his voice wavering slightly, he announced he would be stepping down immediately. His 12-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia that required his full attention and frequent travel for specialized treatments. The room fell silent as he explained his decision to prioritize his family. Nobody questioned it. Mark had given everything to the company for years, and now his daughter needed him more. This company is in excellent hands, he assured us in his final address. The foundation we built together is strong. The security team especially, he nodded toward me, has created safeguards that will protect us through this transition. His departure left an enormous void. The executive team immediately began searching for a replacement, a process that dragged on for 3 months. I participated in interviewing several candidates, assessing their technical knowledge and security mindset. Many were qualified, but lacked the vision Mark had brought to the role. Then Victor Harrington arrived. 6 feet tall with perfect teeth and designer suits, Victor brought a resume that made our executives practically salivate. MIT computer science degree, senior engineering roles at Google and Facebook, and most recently chief technology officer at a startup that sold for $500 million. He spoke confidently about scalability, microservices architecture, and artificial intelligence initiatives that would revolutionize our platform. During his technical interview, I noticed something concerning. When pressed on specific security implementations, Victor's answers became vague and theoretical. He spoke about security in broad strokes, using industry buzzwords but lacking practical knowledge of implementation details. How would you handle API authentication for third-party integrations while maintaining zero-trust principles? I asked. Victor smiled broadly. Great question. I believe in a comprehensive approach to API security that leverages industry best practices while maintaining agility. At my previous company, we implemented cutting-edge solutions that balanced security with user experience. He never actually answered the question. I raised my concerns with the hiring committee. He talks a good game, but I am not convinced he has hands-on experience with security infrastructure. Some of his answers seemed memorized rather than lived. The CEO, Laura, and other executives dismissed my concerns. They were dazzled by his pedigree and charisma. The board was pressuring them to fill the position quickly, and Victor seemed perfect on paper. "We need someone with vision who can take us to the next level," Laura explained. "Mark recommended we prioritize security, and we will, but we also need innovation and growth. Victor brings that startup energy we need right now." Victor started 2 weeks later. His first day included a company-wide presentation where he outlined his ambitious vision. Standing confidently at the front of our largest conference room, he promised to revolutionize our infrastructure, streamline our development processes, and modernize our approach to product development. "The future of technology belongs to the fast and flexible," he declared. "Security is important, but it cannot be a bottleneck that stifles innovation. We will implement smart security that enables speed rather than hinders it." I tried to maintain an open mind. Change can be good, and fresh perspectives valuable. Maybe Victor would bring insights from his impressive background that would strengthen our company. Maybe my initial concerns were just resistance to change, or even jealousy over losing my trusted mentor. But watching him speak, I noticed he never once mentioned our existing security infrastructure or the specific challenges of protecting enterprise data. He spoke about moving fast and breaking barriers, phrases that make security professionals nervous for good reason. As the applause filled the room, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Something was not right about Victor Harrington, and I feared we were about to find out exactly what that was. The first warning signs appeared during our initial security review meeting. 3 days into his role, Victor called my team together to understand the current security landscape. I prepared a comprehensive presentation on our infrastructure threat detection systems and mitigation strategies. I was actually excited to showcase the robust architecture we had built. 20 minutes into my presentation, Victor interrupted me mid-sentence. "This is all very interesting, Gemma, but it seems incredibly over-engineered. How much development time are we spending on these security protocols?" I explained that our security measures were proportional to the sensitivity of data we handled and industry compliance requirements. Victor leaned back in his chair. "I understand compliance, but your two-factor authentication implementation is overkill. Our competitors are shipping features twice as fast because they are not building Fort Knox around every function. Those competitors have also experienced data breaches," I countered. "Our clients choose us specifically because of our security record." Victor dismissed this with a wave of his hand. A few isolated incidents that were quickly contained. "The market rewards innovation and speed. We need to streamline these protocols." The meeting set the tone for what was to come. Within 2 weeks, Victor had systematically begun dismantling many of our security practices, labeling them as legacy approaches or development bottlenecks. At the next all-hands meeting, Victor introduced 2 new senior engineers who would be joining the leadership team, Alex Mercer and Brian Walsh, both former colleagues from his previous company. They were immediately granted broad access privileges across our systems, bypassing the normal onboarding security protocols we had established. "Alex and Brian are trusted associates who will help accelerate our technical transformation," Victor announced. "They will be working across teams to identify inefficiencies in our current processes." During a code review the following week, I discovered Victor had fundamentally misunderstood how our encryption systems worked. He had commented on a pull request, suggesting we simplify our encryption key management in a way that would have created a single point of failure. "This distributed key approach is unnecessarily complex," he wrote in the comments. "We should centralize key management for better performance." I tried to explain that our distributed approach was intentional, following security best practices for preventing catastrophic breaches. Victor responded by suggesting I was being pedantic and overly cautious. His first major decision came when he declared our customer authentication process too cumbersome and directed the product team to simplify it. Instead of our carefully designed progressive authentication system that adapted security requirements based on request sensitivity, he pushed for a simpler token-based approach with extended session durations. "Users hate entering passwords," he declared in a product meeting. We are driving them away with all these verification steps. I prepared a compromise proposal that would maintain security while improving the user experience. I spent the weekend creating mock-ups and security documentation to present a balanced alternative. I appreciate the effort, Gemma, Victor said, after glancing at my proposal for less than a minute. But we have already moved forward with the simplified approach. The product team began implementation yesterday. The changes were pushed through despite my objections. 3 weeks later, our sales team celebrated landing our largest client, yet a financial services firm with strict security requirements. Somehow, Victor had convinced them that our streamlined authentication was actually an improvement. "See," Victor said, passing me in the hallway after the announcement. "Innovation wins clients, not excessive caution." I forced a smile, but inside I was deeply troubled. How had he convinced a financial services company to accept weaker security? Something did not add up. The conflicts continued to escalate. In meetings, Victor would routinely undermine my expertise, often cutting me off mid-explanation or dismissing technical concerns as theoretical risks. I began documenting every concerning decision in a detailed journal. Each entry included the date, the security principle being compromised, potential risks, and any unsuccessful attempts to address the issue. At first, this was just for my own records, a way to keep track of mounting concerns. I had no idea how valuable this documentation would later become. The first real security incident occurred about 2 months after Victor joined. A smaller client reported unauthorized access to their account dashboard. My team investigated and discovered the issue stemmed directly from the simplified authentication system Victor had implemented. We were able to contain the breach quickly, and the affected data was minimal, but it confirmed my fears. I brought the findings to Victor privately, hoping he would recognize the warning sign. "This is exactly why we need to re-implement proper authentication protocols," I explained. "We were lucky this time, but next time could be much worse." Victor's response was unexpected. "This is good feedback, Gemma. I appreciate your diligence. Let me think about how we can strengthen the system without reverting to the clunky previous approach." His conciliatory tone surprised me. Maybe he was finally listening. Maybe the reality of an actual breach, however small, had broken through his resistance. That hope lasted exactly 23 hours. The next day, rather than addressing the authentication vulnerability, Victor announced a system-wide performance initiative that would further reduce security checks in our API layer to improve response times. It became clear that Victor was not simply misguided or inexperienced with security. He was actively working against basic security principles with full awareness of the risks. The question was, why? Was it simple arrogance, a fundamental misunderstanding of our business, or something else entirely? As my concerns grew, I noticed other changes around the office. Colleagues who had previously sought my security input now avoided eye contact in the hallway. Meetings that would normally include my team were scheduled without our knowledge. Victor was systematically isolating the security team from the rest of the organization. "Just focus on monitoring and incident response," he told me during our one-on-one meeting. "Let the development teams worry about implementation. Your team is creating bottlenecks in the development process." Each day brought new examples of security principles being violated, and each day my sense of impending disaster grew stronger. By his 3rd month, Victor had established complete control over TechForward's technical direction. He instituted a new policy, requiring all security-related changes to pass his personal approval, effectively bottlenecking my team's ability to address vulnerabilities. What had once been an agile security response team was now trapped in bureaucratic limbo. "We need decentralized decision-making to ensure consistent implementation across teams," Victor explained in an email announcing the change. He created an online form for security modification requests that seemed designed to discourage submissions, requiring extensive justification for even minor security patches. The first major blow to my team came when Victor reassigned Amir and Jasmine to different projects. Amir, our penetration testing specialist, was moved to the mobile app development team, despite having no experience in that area. Jasmine, our API security expert, was reassigned to customer support integration. "We need to distribute security knowledge throughout the organization," Victor claimed when I confronted him about breaking up my team. Security should not be siloed in one department. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but the reality was that both Amir and Jasmine were now working in areas where their security expertise was being wasted. Neither was consulted about security matters in their new roles. They were effectively demoted to regular developers. With my team reduced by 40%, our ability to monitor systems and respond to threats was severely compromised. The remaining members, David, Tony, and myself, were stretched thin, trying to maintain oversight of increasingly complex systems. One afternoon, I discovered a series of dangerous changes Victor had pushed through under the guise of performance optimization. He had removed several validation layers in our database access protocols, opening potential SQL injection vulnerabilities. He had also disabled certain logging functions that were crucial for detecting unusual access patterns. These checks were creating unnecessary overhead, he explained when I raised concerns. Our monitoring shows they were rarely triggering anyway. They rarely trigger because they prevent attacks before they happen, I argued. That is like saying we should remove smoke detectors because they rarely detect fires. Victor dismissed my analogy with a laugh. Smoke detectors have a clear purpose. Your excessive validations are just paranoia codified into our system. I tried escalating my concerns to Laura, our CEO. I requested a private meeting to discuss security vulnerabilities being introduced into our platform. She agreed. But when I arrived at her office, Victor was already there, smiling confidently. I invited Victor since this concerns his department, Laura explained. The meeting became a 2-on-1 situation where Victor countered each of my concerns with technical jargon and misleading statistics. When I mentioned the authentication weaknesses, he presented charts showing decreased login failures and improved user retention. The numbers speak for themselves, he said confidently. User frustration with security measures was driving clients away. Our new approach balances security with usability. I tried explaining that login failures decreasing could actually indicate reduced security effectiveness, not improved user experience, but Victor skillfully redirected the conversation before I could make my point. Gemma has always been exceptionally cautious, which we value, he told Laura, but sometimes this caution becomes excessive fear that holds back progress. The market is evolving faster than our competitors, and we need to keep pace. Laura seemed convinced by his explanation. The board is thrilled with our recent growth numbers, Gemma. Maybe we do need to find a better balance between security and innovation. The following week, Victor called an engineering all-hands meeting where he openly criticized what he called the security-first mindset that had stifled innovation at TechForward. We have been operating from a position of fear rather than opportunity, he declared to the room of developers. Security is important, but it cannot be the primary driver of every decision. Moving forward, we will adopt a more balanced approach that prioritizes customer experience and development velocity. Many engineers nodded along, especially those who had previously felt frustrated by security requirements. Victor was offering them freedom from constraints, and naturally that was appealing. I watched as he systematically turned the engineering department against the very security principles that had protected our company for years. After the meeting, I discovered something even more alarming. Alex and Brian, Victor's friends from his previous company, had been granted root-level access to production systems, a privilege that was typically restricted to a small handful of senior engineers and required extensive approval processes. Neither had gone through proper security clearance procedures. When I checked access logs, I found they had been exploring sensitive areas of our infrastructure, including customer data repositories and encryption key management systems. Their access patterns seemed exploratory, rather than task-directed, as if they were mapping our entire system. I documented these concerns and prepared to raise them with Laura again, this time with concrete evidence of security protocol violations. Before I could secure a meeting, however, we experienced another security incident. A client reported unusual data access patterns in their account. Investigation revealed that someone had accessed sensitive financial projections that were supposed to be restricted. Though we contained the breach quickly, the client was understandably upset. Victor called an emergency meeting where, to my shock, he blamed the incident on legacy security architecture designed by my team. This is exactly why we need to accelerate our security modernization, he announced. The fragmented approach created by the previous security team has left gaps that are now being exploited. It was a complete inversion of reality. The breach had occurred precisely because of the changes Victor had implemented, not because of our original architecture. But he presented his case so convincingly with charts and technical diagrams that many people believed him. After that meeting, I noticed a definite change in how colleagues interacted with me. People who had previously sought my advice now avoided me in the hallway. I overheard whispers about the security team's screw-up when passing the break room. Victor had successfully made my team the scapegoat for problems his changes had created. The final blow came when Rachel, my most senior team member and closest ally, submitted her resignation. We met for coffee outside the office where she could speak freely. "I cannot work like this anymore, Gemma," she said, eyes downcast. "Victor is dismantling everything we built and nobody seems to care. I have a family to support. I cannot risk being associated with what feels like an inevitable disaster." Her words hit me hard because they reflected my own fears. Tech Forward was heading toward a major security catastrophe, and Victor was accelerating toward it rather than away from it. "I understand," I told her, fighting back tears. "I would never ask you to put your career at risk." "What will you do?" she asked. "Stay and fight for now," I replied. "Someone has to try to limit the damage." As Rachel departed, leaving just David, Tony, and me on the security team, I felt increasingly isolated. Sleep became elusive as I worried constantly about vulnerabilities being introduced into our systems. Each morning, I would check access logs and code commits with dread, discovering new security shortcuts implemented overnight. Victor had systematically undermined my authority, divided my team, and positioned himself as a visionary while painting me as an obstacle to progress. The company that had once valued and respected my expertise now viewed me with suspicion and frustration, but the worst was still to come. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. I received an urgent alert from our monitoring system: unusual access patterns detected in the account of FinSecure, our largest client. Someone was attempting to extract large volumes of sensitive financial data using administrator credentials. Tony and I immediately initiated our incident response protocol, isolating the affected systems and blocking the suspicious access. We worked frantically, tracing the attack vector and containing potential damage. By noon, we had successfully locked down the affected data and prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach. The attack was sophisticated but exploited exactly the vulnerabilities I had been warning about for months. The simplified authentication system Victor had implemented allowed the attackers to bypass several security layers once they had obtained initial access credentials. Following security best practices, I documented the incident thoroughly and reported it to the appropriate regulatory authorities as required by our compliance obligations. I then called an emergency meeting with the executive team to brief them on what had happened. Victor arrived at the meeting visibly, angry face flushed red. Before I could even present our findings, he exploded. "Who authorized you to lock down production systems without approval? You have disrupted service for dozens of clients." "We were actively being attacked," I explained calmly. "The emergency response protocol does not require prior approval. That is by design, to enable rapid response." "That protocol is outdated and should have been revised," Victor snapped. "You caused a service interruption that affected our uptime guarantees." I pulled up the attack logs on the conference room screen. This was a targeted attack against our largest financial client. The attackers were attempting to extract confidential financial models and client lists. Had we not responded immediately, we would be facing a breach affecting thousands of consumers and potential regulatory fines in the millions. Laura and the other executives looked concerned. "How did they get in?" the chief financial officer asked. I hesitated before answering truthfully. They exploited vulnerabilities in the simplified authentication system implemented 3 months ago. Specifically, the extended session tokens and reduced validation checks created an opening that allowed credential hijacking. Victor interrupted. "That is speculation. We do not know that for certain yet. What we do know is that Gemma's team disrupted service without following proper channels." The meeting devolved into a technical debate that left non-technical executives confused. Victor skillfully redirected blame, suggesting the attack succeeded because of incomplete implementation of his security modernization efforts rather than fundamental flaws in his approach. By the end of the meeting, what should have been recognized as a successful defense against a serious attack had somehow been transformed into evidence of my team's failure. The following day, Victor called a company-wide town hall. Standing confidently before the entire staff, he announced what he called a security restructuring initiative. Yesterday's incident highlighted critical weaknesses in our current security approach, he began. While our team managed to contain the immediate threat, the disruption to service and near miss demonstrates that our current security infrastructure is not meeting our needs. I sat stunned as Victor unveiled his plan. Tech Forward would be eliminating its internal security team entirely. All security functions would be outsourced to a third-party vendor specializing in modern cloud security solutions. This will allow us to leverage specialized expertise while focusing our internal resources on our core product, he explained, as if outsourcing security for a data management platform made any sense at all. I could not remain silent. In front of the entire company, I stood up. Outsourcing security for a company that handles sensitive enterprise data is dangerous and potentially negligent, I stated firmly. Our clients trust us specifically because we maintain control over security internally. This decision directly contradicts commitments we have made to clients regarding data protection. The room fell silent. No one had ever so directly challenged Victor in a public forum. Victor's smile tightened. Thank you for your perspective, Gemma. This is exactly the kind of resistance to change that has held Tech Forward back. The security landscape is evolving, and we must evolve with it. Our clients care about results, not outdated methodologies. Our clients specifically ask about internal security controls during sales calls, I countered. It is a key differentiator from our competitors. The attack yesterday targeted precisely the vulnerabilities introduced when we removed those controls. Victor's expression hardened. That is enough, Gemma. Your characterization is inaccurate and alarming to the team. We can discuss your concerns privately. The team should be alarmed. I continued beyond caring about professional consequences at this point. We are systematically removing the safeguards that protect our clients' most sensitive data. Yesterday was a warning. Next time will be worse. The tension in the room was palpable. Employees looked back and forth between Victor and me, witnessing a public power struggle over the company's future. Victor stepped toward me, voice lowered, but still audible to those nearby. You are undermining leadership in front of the entire company. This is completely unprofessional. What is unprofessional is dismantling critical security infrastructure without understanding the consequences, I replied. Victor's face flushed dark red. He turned to address the room again, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. I was hoping to handle this differently, but, given the current display, I have no choice but to be direct. As part of our security restructuring, the role of internal security lead is being eliminated effective immediately. He turned to face me directly. Gemma, your position has been terminated. You are no longer needed here. My team will handle the transition from this point. The room gasped collectively. Being fired publicly was almost unheard of in our company culture. Several people looked away uncomfortably. Human Resources will contact you regarding exit details, Victor continued. Please clear your desk and turn in your access card by the end of the day. I stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the shock of being publicly terminated. Then, gathering what dignity I could, I walked out of the conference room with my head held high. At my desk, I methodically packed my personal items, while colleagues watched awkwardly from a distance. No one approached me directly, likely fearing association with the person who had just been very publicly fired. As I was placing my coffee mug in my bag, Victor appeared at my desk, flanked by Alex and Brian. We will need to verify that all company intellectual property remains with Tech Forward, he said coldly. One of the IT staff will need to inspect your personal devices before you leave. Everything I have done is documented in our systems, I replied. My work has always been transparent. Victor watched as I finished packing, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. As I stood to leave, he leaned in slightly. Technology evolves quickly. Some people just cannot keep up, he said quietly, just for me to hear. No hard feelings. It is just business. As I walked out of the building that had been my professional home for 6 years, carrying a small box of personal items, I felt a mixture of anger, humiliation, and fear. Not just fear for my career, but genuine fear for Tech Forward and its clients. Victor was systematically dismantling critical security infrastructure, and I had just lost any ability to prevent disaster. What I did not realize then was that my journey with Tech Forward was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The drive home from Tech Forward headquarters was a blur. I moved through traffic on autopilot, my mind cycling through the events of the day and the implications for my future. Being publicly fired after 6 years of exemplary service was a professional nightmare. My reputation, my career trajectory, everything I had built was now in jeopardy. I arrived home to an empty apartment that suddenly felt too quiet, too still. Dropping my box of office belongings on the kitchen counter, I sank onto my couch and finally allowed the emotions to surface. Anger came first, hot and overwhelming. Then waves of anxiety about financial security and future employment. Finally, a deep sadness for the company and team I had worked so hard to build and protect. My phone buzzed with messages of support from Rachel and a few other colleagues brave enough to reach out. Then came a text from David, who was still at the office, Victor moving fast. Already revoking security protocols. Emergency board meeting tomorrow to approve full system architecture overhaul. This was followed by a message from Tony. They are removing the multi-layer verification system from admin accounts. Asked me to document override procedures. This is insane. The messages confirmed my worst fears. Victor was not waiting to dismantle our security infrastructure. He was accelerating his timeline now that I was out of the way. But why? Why was he so determined to weaken our security posture? It went beyond simple arrogance or misguided priorities. Something deeper was driving his actions. I needed to understand what was really happening. Moving to my home office, I began a systematic investigation into Victor Harrington beyond the surface-level background check the company had performed. First, I reached out to former colleagues from my network who had connections to companies on Victor's resume. LinkedIn messages, emails, and a few phone calls to people I trusted. I was careful to frame my questions professionally, focusing on his technical approach and leadership style rather than making accusations. The responses trickled in over the next several hours, each more concerning than the last. A former Google engineer wrote Victor Harrington. He was not the technical lead he claimed to be. Mostly managed vendor relationships, not architecture. A contact at Facebook was even more direct. He was quietly asked to leave after repeated security compliance issues. Nothing public, but definitely not the star his resume suggests. Most illuminating was a message from someone who had worked at the startup where Victor had been CTO. There were serious concerns about data handling just before the acquisition. Several of us raised red flags, but the founders were focused on the exit package. After the sale closed, the acquiring company discovered multiple security issues that had been concealed during due diligence. Cannot say more without violating my NDA. A pattern was emerging. Victor's impressive resume contained significant embellishments and outright fabrications. He had systematically exaggerated his roles and responsibilities, particularly around technical architecture and security implementation. Moreover, he had a history of security compromises that had been carefully kept quiet through NDAs and private separations. Further investigation revealed that Alex and Brian Victor's trusted associates had similar patterns in their work history. They had followed Victor from company to company, always in roles that granted significant system access without corresponding accountability. But discovering Victor's deception was only half the puzzle. I still needed to understand his motivation. Was this simple incompetence masquerading as confidence? Or was there something more deliberate happening? The answer came from an unlikely source. A security researcher I had collaborated with on an industry project sent me a confidential message. Your ex-CTO's name came up in some dark web monitoring we do. Cannot share specifics, but there are correlations between his employment history and data appearing in certain marketplaces. Nothing definitive, but concerning pattern. The pieces clicked into place. Victor wasn't just incompetent or arrogant, he was potentially involved in data theft and sale. His pattern of joining companies undermining security and then moving on after security incidents aligned perfectly with someone deliberately creating backdoors for data exfiltration. This revelation changed everything. Victor wasn't just a bad CTO. He was actively dangerous to Tech Forward and its clients. The rushed outsourcing of security, the removal of monitoring systems, the excessive access granted to his associates, all supported this theory. I needed to act, but as a terminated employee, my options were limited. Direct accusations without irrefutable proof would seem like the bitter revenge of a fired employee. I needed leverage, something concrete that would force the company to take my concerns seriously. That's when I remembered a security feature I had implemented 18 months earlier with Mark's approval. After a series of high-profile breaches at other tech companies, we had added an additional verification layer to root-level system access. Any attempt to modify core security infrastructure required answering a rotating security question in addition to standard authentication. The questions were designed to test not just password knowledge but actual familiarity with our systems and security architecture. They required contextual understanding that could not be easily researched or guessed. Mark had called it our human verification layer, a way to ensure that even if credentials were compromised, an attacker would need insider knowledge to make critical system changes. Victor would almost certainly need root access to complete his security restructuring. He would need to disable core protection systems, modify authentication protocols, and grant extensive privileges to the third-party security vendor. And to do that, he would need to answer questions that tested deep knowledge of our systems. Knowledge I was increasingly certain he did not possess. I carefully considered the legal and ethical implications of my realization. Was I contemplating corporate sabotage? No, I decided. The security question system was fully documented, approved by previous leadership, and implemented for legitimate security reasons. It was functioning exactly as designed to prevent unauthorized changes to critical systems even by those with apparent authority, but lacking proper knowledge. I spent the night researching Victor, documenting his history of deception, and organizing evidence of the security vulnerabilities he had introduced at Tech Forward. I created a comprehensive dossier that connected his actions to specific security risks, supported by technical documentation and access logs. By morning, I had assembled a compelling case that any technical board member would understand. As dawn broke, I finally fell into an exhausted sleep on my couch, laptop still open beside me. I had done everything I could to prepare. Now I could only wait for Victor to encounter the security question system that stood as the last line of defense between him and complete control of Tech Forward's infrastructure. The call came sooner than I expected. My phone rang at 9:15 the next morning, startling me awake. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for it on the coffee table, expecting another message of support from a former colleague. Instead, I saw Laura's name on the caller ID. The CEO herself was calling less than 24 hours after I had been publicly fired. Gemma. Her voice was tense, professional, with a hint of urgency I had rarely heard before. I need you to come to the office immediately. We have a situation. I was terminated yesterday. I replied, still processing the surreal nature of the call. Victor made it quite clear my services were no longer needed. Laura sighed heavily. I am aware of the circumstances, and we will address that. But right now we have an urgent technical issue that requires your expertise. The board is here for an emergency meeting and we cannot access critical systems for a planned demonstration. What kind of access issue? I asked, though I already had a strong suspicion. Victor is unable to implement the security transitions he planned to demonstrate. The system is requesting answers to technical questions that apparently only you and Mark fully understand. Her voice lowered slightly. Victor Island, suggesting you may have deliberately sabotaged the system before leaving. There it was. The security question protocol was working exactly as designed. That is a serious allegation, I said carefully. The authentication system is functioning as documented and approved by previous leadership. I would be happy to explain the system to the board, but I need assurance that I will be treated professionally, not accused of wrongdoing for implementing standard security practices. Of course, Laura said quickly. We just need this resolved. The entire board and our major investors are waiting. I will be there in 30 minutes, I replied. I dressed quickly in my most professional attire, a navy blue suit I reserved for client presentations and board meetings. This would be the most important meeting of my career, and I needed every advantage. I gathered my documentation on Victor, loaded it onto a secure tablet, and headed back to the office I had been forced to leave just yesterday. The receptionist looked startled as I walked through the front doors. Word of my public termination had clearly spread throughout the company. "Miss Reynolds is expecting me," I said confidently. "For the board meeting." I was escorted directly to our largest conference room, where an extraordinary scene awaited me. The entire board of directors sat around the massive oak table, along with several major investors I recognized from previous funding rounds. At the head of the table, Victor stood beside a large display screen showing our authentication interface, his face flushed with frustration and barely contained anger. Laura rose as I entered. "Thank you for coming, Gemma. We are experiencing an issue with administrator access to our core systems. Victor is attempting to demonstrate the security transition plan, but cannot proceed past an authentication challenge." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and in Victor's case, unmistakable hostility. "Before we begin," Victor said sharply, "I want it on record that I believe this is deliberate sabotage." Gemma implemented a hidden backdoor before her termination to prevent necessary system changes. I remained calm, placing my tablet on the table. "What you are encountering is not a backdoor or sabotage. It is a documented security feature, implemented 18 months ago with full approval from Mark Stevens and the previous Security Council. I would be happy to explain how it works and why it exists." The board chairman, a distinguished older gentleman named Robert Blackwell, nodded. "Please do." I approached the display screen, which showed the security challenge prompt. "This is our human knowledge verification system. It was implemented after the major breaches at Equifax, and Capital One demonstrated that credential theft had become sophisticated enough to bypass standard authentication measures." I pulled up the documentation from my tablet and sent it to the display screen. "The system requires anyone attempting to make fundamental changes to our security architecture to demonstrate contextual knowledge about our systems beyond just having the correct passwords. The questions rotate and are designed to test actual familiarity with our infrastructure, not just possession of credentials." "This seems extremely restrictive," one board member commented. "It prevents your own CTO from making necessary changes. It prevents anyone, regardless of title, from making critical system changes without demonstrating they truly understand our infrastructure." I corrected gently. "In the event of a credential compromise, this provides an additional layer of protection that cannot be easily bypassed even by sophisticated attackers." Victor cut in. "This is absurd. As CTO, I should have unrestricted access to all systems. This hidden verification layer was clearly designed to create a bottleneck only Gemma could resolve." "The system was fully documented in our security architecture," I replied. "Mark could answer these questions. Any senior engineer with deep knowledge of our systems could answer them. They test understanding, not special access." I turned to the board. "But while we are discussing system access, I believe there are more serious concerns that require your attention." I took a deep breath, knowing this was my only chance. Since joining Tech Forward, Victor has systematically dismantled critical security measures, granted excessive access privileges to outside associates without proper vetting, and proposed outsourcing our entire security operation despite contractual obligations to clients requiring internal controls. The room tensed as I continued. More concerning, I have discovered significant discrepancies in Victor's employment history and technical qualifications. "This is preposterous," Victor interrupted. "We are here to address a technical issue, not listen to defamatory accusations from a disgruntled former employee." Robert Blackwell raised his hand for silence. "These are serious allegations, Gemma. Do you have evidence to support them?" "I do," I replied, bringing up my research on the screen. "I have verified that Victor's roles at Google and Facebook were significantly different from what was represented in his resume. He was not a senior architect, but primarily a project manager with limited technical responsibilities. I displayed communications from my contacts at those companies with names redacted to protect their privacy. Most concerning, he was quietly dismissed from his previous role following security compliance issues that were concealed from public view through non-disclosure agreements." The board members leaned forward, examining the evidence with growing concern. Victor's face had gone from red to pale. Furthermore, I continued the security changes implemented under Victor's direction, created the exact vulnerabilities exploited in yesterday's attempted breach of our largest financial client's data. This was not coincidental. The pattern of security degradation matches similar incidents at his previous companies, followed by data appearing in known dark web marketplaces. Laura looked stunned. Are you suggesting this was deliberate? I believe the evidence supports that conclusion, I replied carefully. At minimum, it demonstrates a pattern of negligence and misrepresentation that has placed our company and client data at significant risk. Victor slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. She is fabricating conspiracy theories because she cannot accept modern security approaches. Gemma was terminated for insubordination and resisting necessary changes. Now she is retaliating with baseless accusations. Robert Blackwell turned to Victor. If these allegations are baseless, you should have no difficulty addressing them specifically. Let us start with your role at Google. Were you in fact a senior security architect as your resume states? Victor hesitated, his confidence visibly wavering. My role encompassed many responsibilities that would be equivalent to that position. That is not what I asked, Robert pressed. Did you hold the title and responsibilities of senior security architect? My title was technically senior project manager, but I directed security initiatives, Victor admitted reluctantly. Robert's expression hardened. And the security incident at your previous company that reportedly occurred just before acquisition? Standard challenges during any transition, Victor deflected. Nothing unusual. I pulled up additional documentation. I have statements from 3 former employees indicating that security vulnerabilities were intentionally concealed during due diligence, and that you personally directed the concealment. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Robert Blackwell looked at the other board members, then back at me. Gemma, in your professional assessment, what is the current security status of tech-forward systems? Compromised, I replied without hesitation. Critical verification layers have been removed. Excessive access has been granted to individuals without proper vetting, and monitoring systems have been disabled under the guise of performance optimization. Most concerning, the proposed outsourcing would transfer control of our security infrastructure to a third-party vendor that has not been properly assessed for compliance with our client contractual obligations. Laura looked pale. Our largest clients specifically require internally managed security controls. We could lose millions in contracts if we violate those terms. Robert turned to Victor. Do you have responses to these specific technical concerns? Victor's composure was crumbling. This is being blown out of proportion. Every modern company is moving towards streamlined security and third-party management. Gemma represents an outdated, paranoid approach that is holding tech forward back. That did not answer my question, Robert said flatly. Can you specifically address the technical vulnerabilities that have allegedly been introduced? Victor stumbled through vague explanations that even the non-technical board members could recognize as evasive. As his responses became increasingly defensive, the mood in the room shifted perceptibly. Finally, Robert turned back to me. Gemma, what would you recommend as immediate next steps to secure our systems? It was the question I had been waiting for. The tide had turned. First, we need to restore the security protocols that were disabled, particularly around authentication and access monitoring. Second, we should conduct a full security audit to identify any potential backdoors or vulnerabilities that may have been introduced. Third, we need to review all access privileges granted in the past 3 months, especially those assigned to external individuals. Robert nodded, then made a decision that changed everything. Laura, please work with Gemma to immediately secure our systems and revoke any questionable access privileges. Victor, we will need to continue this discussion separately. For now, you are suspended pending a full investigation into these allegations. Victor started to protest, but security had already been called. 2 guards appeared at the door ready to escort him from the building. As Victor was led away, still protesting his innocence and threatening legal action, I felt no satisfaction, only relief that tech-forward systems and clients would now be protected. Robert addressed me directly. It appears we owe you an apology, Gemma, and perhaps a job offer if you are willing to consider it. I had protected the company I cared about, but the journey was far from over. We had systems to secure and trust to rebuild. But in that moment, watching the board members nod in agreement with Robert's words, I knew that truth and expertise had finally prevailed over deception and charisma. The security question system had worked exactly as designed, not just to verify technical knowledge, but ultimately to protect the entire company from a threat none of us had fully anticipated. The weeks following the boardroom confrontation were intense. An independent security firm verified my findings, discovering even more concerning evidence than I had initially uncovered. Victor had indeed established multiple backdoor access points throughout our infrastructure. More damning forensic analysis of his company devices revealed communications with known data brokers, confirming that his actions were not mere incompetence, but deliberate sabotage. The full investigation revealed Victor had successfully executed similar schemes at 2 previous companies, extracting valuable data and selling it through intermediaries while maintaining plausible deniability. His pattern was consistent. Join companies with valuable data assets, undermine security under the guise of modernization, extract sensitive information, then move on before consequences became apparent. Legal proceedings were initiated against Victor, Alex, and Brian, though most details remained confidential due to ongoing investigations. The board issued a formal apology for my termination, and Laura personally apologized for not listening to my concerns earlier. We were dazzled by his credentials and confidence, she admitted during a private conversation in her office. We trusted the resume without verifying the substance. 2 weeks after the dramatic board meeting, I was offered a new position, Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the CEO with a seat on the executive leadership team. The role came with expanded authority, increased resources, and explicit board support for building a robust security culture throughout the organization. We need someone with both technical expertise and moral courage, Robert told me when presenting the offer. You have demonstrated both under extraordinary pressure. I accepted the position, but the journey back to normal was not immediate or easy. Trust is easily broken but painstakingly rebuilt. Many colleagues who had distanced themselves during Victor's tenure were now awkwardly attempting to re-establish connections. Some openly admitted they should have spoken up, but feared for their jobs. Others still viewed me with suspicion, having absorbed Victor's narrative about my outdated security approach. My first priority was rebuilding the security team. I called Rachel immediately, offering her the role of deputy CISO with significant autonomy and improved compensation. After some consideration, she agreed to return. I should have stayed and fought alongside you, she said during her first day back. I will not make that mistake again. Together, we recruited Amir and Jasmine back to the security team from the departments Victor had reassigned them to. We also brought in new talent, expanding the team to better handle our growing security needs. David and Tony, who had remained loyal during the darkest period, received well-deserved promotions. We implemented a comprehensive security remediation plan, methodically identifying and addressing every vulnerability Victor had introduced. The process was exhausting but necessary, requiring long nights and weekend work to restore our security posture without disrupting business operations. Beyond technical fixes, we faced a deeper challenge, rebuilding the security culture that Victor had systematically undermined. We developed a company-wide security awareness program that went beyond typical compliance training, helping employees understand the why behind security practices rather than just the what. Laura supported these efforts, fully making security a standing agenda item in all executive meetings and regularly communicating its importance to the entire organization. The board established a dedicated security committee to provide oversight and ensure security considerations remained central to company decisions. Gradually, the atmosphere at Tech Forward transformed. Security was no longer viewed as an obstacle to innovation, but as a fundamental requirement for sustainable growth. Engineers began proactively consulting with our team during early development stages rather than treating security as an afterthought. My relationship with Laura evolved from the professional tension that had characterized Victor's tenure to a true partnership. We did not always agree, but she ensured my perspective was heard and respected, particularly on matters where security and business objectives seemed to conflict. What I have learned, she told me during a leadership retreat 6 months after the incident, is that security versus innovation is a false dichotomy. Real innovation builds security in from the beginning, not as an add-on. The company thrived under this balanced approach. We retained all major clients, many of whom expressed relief at our renewed security focus. Several new enterprise clients specifically cited our security governance as a primary reason for choosing Tech Forward over competitors. 1 year after the boardroom confrontation, we received an industry recognition that held special meaning for me, the Enterprise Security Leadership Award, acknowledging Tech Forward for exemplary security practices and governance. Standing on stage accepting the award on behalf of my team, I reflected on how close we had come to a very different outcome. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about leadership resilience and the importance of standing firm for what you know is right, even when it comes at personal cost. I learned that technical expertise alone is insufficient. Courage and communication skills are equally essential for security leaders. I also gained a deeper appreciation for documentation and process, often considered tedious aspects of security work. The security question system that ultimately exposed Victor would never have existed without Mark's willingness to invest in additional protection layers that seemed excessive to outsiders. The detailed logs and records I had maintained provided the evidence needed when it mattered most. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that true security leadership sometimes requires being the voice of caution when everyone else is rushing forward. It means asking difficult questions and accepting temporary unpopularity in service of a greater responsibility. Today, as I mentor rising security professionals on my expanded team, I emphasize this balance between technical excellence and moral courage. Our job is not to be liked, I tell them, but to protect what matters even when that protection is invisible and unthanked, until the moment it becomes absolutely crucial. The security incident that could have destroyed Tech Forward instead transformed it into a stronger, more resilient organization with security woven into its fabric. Victor, intending to exploit vulnerabilities for personal gain, inadvertently forced us to build something better than we had before. Sometimes the most important security measure is not a technology or protocol, but a person willing to stand firm when pressure mounts to compromise. One security question did not just stop a malicious actor, it saved an entire company and the sensitive data of thousands of clients who depended on us. In the world of technology, truth has a way of eventually revealing itself, much like good code always finds a way to prove its value. And sometimes, a simple security question can be the difference between disaster and salvation. Have you ever had to stand up for what was right in your workplace, even when it felt like everyone was against you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found my security journey valuable, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with anyone who might benefit from these lessons. Remember, in the world of security, often the most important defense is not a system, but a person willing to protect it. Thank you for watching and stay secure out there.